Beneath the polished surface of a silver lie, the dark truth is always waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. Join us as we peel back the layers of deception to reveal the raw reality behind the most beautiful masks. Hit subscribe now and never miss the big reveal. The number on my screen was one I hadn't seen in almost 4 months. My sister Diana. I stared at it through 2 full rings. The way you stare at a storm cloud moving toward your house, not afraid exactly. Just bracing. I answered. James. Her voice was clipped, the way it always got when she was in professional mode. The same tone she used closing deals at her firm in Atlanta. I'm calling about Mom. She had a fall last week. It was serious. She's been in memory care since Tuesday. I've already spoken to her doctors. Given her condition, she can't manage the bakeries anymore. I've taken over as her power of attorney. The properties are going to market next month. Her savings have been moved to a managed account. You don't need to worry about any of it. I've handled everything. She paused. I said nothing. I thought you should know, she added. Then she hung up. I sat on my back porch in Clover Hill, Tennessee, and I looked at the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I looked up at the driveway. My mother's Buick was parked right there. She'd driven it over herself that morning. We'd had biscuits and gravy together at my kitchen table, and she'd complained for 20 minutes that my coffee was too weak. She'd left maybe 3 hours ago. I almost called Diana back. Instead, I laughed a short, dry sound that surprised me because my sister had just made a catastrophic miscalculation, and she didn't even know it yet. Let me back up. My name is James Hartley. I'm 64 years old, taught high school history in Clover Hill for 31 years before I retired. My mother, Eleanor Hartley, is 79, sharp as a tack, stubborn as a fence post, and the owner of 3 Sweet Eleanor's bakery locations scattered across 2 counties. She started the first one in 1984 with a $5,000 loan from her own mother and a recipe for cinnamon rolls that people still drive 40 miles to buy on a Saturday morning. My sister Diana is 58, left Clover Hill at 22 for law school in Atlanta, and never really came back. Not for holidays, not for our father's funeral 8 years ago, not for Mom's 75th birthday party that the whole town attended. She sent flowers that time, expensive ones, in a tall glass vase. Mom put them on the counter at the bakery and told every customer they were from her daughter in Atlanta. Diana had been back to Clover Hill maybe 6 times in the last decade. Her last visit was 19 months ago. She stayed 2 nights, spent most of them on her phone, and left after a stiff Sunday brunch where she told Mom the bakeries were quaint and that she should think about selling before the market shifted. Mom smiled and changed the subject. I watched Diana's face when she did. There was something there, a flicker of frustration, quickly buried that I filed away without thinking much about it at the time. The thing you need to understand about my mother is that she built those bakeries the way other people build families. Every employee had worked there for at least a decade. The woman who ran the Millfield location, Sandra, had started as a teenager sweeping floors. Mom knew every regular customer by name. She knew who was going through a divorce, whose kid just made honor roll, whose husband had just been diagnosed. The bakery wasn't a business to her. It was an ecosystem. A small, stubborn, beautiful ecosystem she'd spent 40 years building from nothing. And Diana wanted to sell it. I didn't call her back right away. I called Mom. She picked up on the second ring. James, honey, I was just about to call you. Sandra said my cinnamon roll order for the Millfield location came in short this week. Do you think you could run the extra trays over Thursday morning? Mom, I said carefully. Have you spoken to Diana recently? A pause. Diana? Not since Christmas. Why? She just called me. She said you had a fall, that you're in memory care. Silence. Then Mom laughed, not my laugh, hers, fuller and warmer. I tripped over the cat getting up from the couch 2 weeks ago. Scraped my elbow. I did not go to memory care, James. I went to the urgent care clinic on Route 9 for a bandage and a tetanus shot. She said she's your power of attorney, that she's already listed the bakeries. The laughing stopped. She's my what? There it was. That cold, clarifying feeling. Not grief, not panic. Something harder and more useful than either of those things. Don't do anything yet, I said. Don't move money. Don't sign anything. I'll be over in an hour. We sat at Mom's kitchen table, the same one I'd done homework on as a kid, the one with the burn mark from when Dad set down a hot casserole dish without a trivet and Mom pretended to be angrier than she was. I walked her through everything Diana had told me, watched Mom's expression move through confusion into something I'd never seen on her face before. Not quite anger, more like grief, with a hard edge underneath it. James, she said slowly, I never gave Diana power of attorney. I have a will. Tom Wallace drew it up 4 years ago. Everything split evenly between you and your sister. But I have never signed over any power of attorney to anyone. Then either Diana is lying, I said, or someone forged your signature. Mom folded her hands on the table. She was quiet for a moment. 2 months ago, she said, Diana called me, asked me a lot of questions about the bakeries, what they were worth, what the properties were assessed at, what my savings looked like. I thought she was just curious, maybe thinking about her own retirement planning. She shook her head. I told her everything, and she asked you about your estate planning. She asked if I'd ever considered a trust. I said Tom had mentioned it, but I hadn't gotten around to it. Mom looked at the wall. I told her which bank I use. I mentioned Tom by name. She turned back to me. I handed her a roadmap, didn't I? I called Tom Wallace the next morning. He'd been our family's attorney for 20 years. Handled everything from Dad's estate to the lease agreements on Mom's second bakery location. He answered before the second ring. I walked him through the whole conversation. He was quiet for a long time on the other end. James, he said finally, I need to check something. Give me 45 minutes. He called back in 30. Okay, here's what I'm seeing. Someone contacted the county clerk's office 6 weeks ago, submitting a durable power of attorney document for Eleanor Hartley. The document lists Diana Hartley Brooks as the agent. It's been filed and recorded. My chest tightened. Is it legitimate? I pulled the document. The notarization is from a notary in Atlanta I don't recognize. The signature looks like Eleanor's, but I have her original signature on file from documents she signed in my office. There are differences. Small, but they're there. He paused. James, if this document is a forgery, we're talking about felony fraud. Elder financial abuse under Tennessee statute. Potentially federal wire fraud if she used electronic communication to execute it. Can Diana actually use it? Has she accessed anything? I'm checking with the bank now. Someone called Mom's bank branch in Clover Hill last week requesting a wire transfer authorization using the POA. The branch manager, to her credit, flagged it as unusual because Eleanor is a known customer who handles her own accounts in person. She put a temporary hold pending verification. I exhaled slowly. So the transfer hasn't gone through. Not yet. But Diana doesn't know that. And she may try again. Or she may try to execute the property listings directly through a real estate agent before anyone catches it. He paused. There's something else. I looked at the bakery addresses against commercial real estate listings. One of your mother's locations, the Millfield property, was quietly listed on a commercial brokerage site 3 days ago. Asking price, $420,000. The listing agent is in Atlanta. My hands were steady. I noticed that about myself. 30 years in a classroom, teaching teenagers will do something to your nervous system. You learn to stay level when things are tilting sideways. Tom, I said, what do we do? We have 2 options. We can contact law enforcement now, but without a confession or direct evidence of Diana's intent, what we have is a disputed document and a suspicious wire request. She could argue clerical error, miscommunication, that Eleanor verbally consented, and the paperwork was just expedited. It gets messy. Or, he stopped. Or we set a trap, I said. Silence. Then, I was going to say, we gather more evidence first. But essentially, yes. I called Detective Renee Simmons the next afternoon. She worked financial crimes for the county sheriff's office and had been in the job for 18 years. She came to Tom's office, not mine, on a Tuesday morning. She wore plain clothes and carried a legal pad and listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the pad twice, the way someone does when they're confirming something they already suspected. "This kind of case," she said, "elder financial fraud using forged documents, is more common than most people want to believe. Happens in families where one sibling is geographically close to the parent and the other is not. The distant sibling assumes they can file paperwork quietly before anyone local is the wiser." She looked at me. "Your sister made one significant miscalculation. She assumed I didn't talk to my mother regularly. That's part of it. The other part is, she moved too fast. The wire request before the listings were even confirmed. The listing filed before the POA had any chance of being validated. She's in a hurry for some reason. That urgency usually means financial pressure on her end." She wrote something down. "Mr. Hartley, is your sister in any kind of financial difficulty that you know of?" I thought about that. Diana's last visit, 19 months ago. The tight smile when I mentioned something about the bakery renovations Mom had done. The way she'd asked very specific questions about property values in the county. "I don't know for certain, but I think it's possible. We need her to make contact with you directly. On record, preferably in a way that demonstrates she knows the power of attorney is forged, or at minimum, that she's knowingly proceeding against your mother's actual wishes." She closed the pad. "Can you get her to reach out to you?" I thought about Diana. The way her mind worked, tactical, impatient, always 3 moves ahead in her own estimation. I can make her think I've found out, and I'm not going to fight her. That I want to negotiate a cut. Detective Simmons looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. "That would work. There's something I haven't told you yet. And I want to tell it right. Because it matters. Diana and I weren't always like this. There was a version of us, a long time ago, that worked differently. She was 6 years older than me. And when I was small, she was the person I followed around the house like a shadow. She taught me to ride a bike in the church parking lot on a Saturday morning, running alongside me and letting go without telling me she'd let go. I didn't fall. When I realized she wasn't holding on anymore, I'd already gone half the length of the lot by myself. She was grinning at the other end. "You didn't need me," she said. "You just thought you did." She was brilliant in school. Valedictorian, debate captain, full scholarship to a university 3 states away. My parents were proud in the way people are proud when something they raised exceeds all expectations. Dad used to tell the story of her acceptance letter to anyone who stood still long enough. But here's what I noticed even then. As a kid, without having language for it, Diana didn't just want to succeed. She needed to be the most accomplished, the most recognized. When Dad talked about her scholarship at the dinner table, her face would settle into satisfaction, not the warm kind, the counting kind. And when, a few years later, Mom mentioned at that same table that I'd been asked to lead the student teaching program at my school, something in Diana's expression flickered. Just for a second. Recalibration. She'd spent her whole adult life becoming someone. A partner at her firm, a respected voice in commercial real estate law, a woman with a nice condo and the right last name. She'd married a Brooks, which she clearly considered an upgrade. And then, somewhere in the last few years, I think the math stopped working for her. The firm had restructured. She'd mentioned it once, briefly, in a way that meant she didn't want to talk about it. Some of the recognition she'd built had apparently come loose. And she turned her eyes toward home, toward the things she'd always dismissed as small. The bakeries were worth close to $1 million combined, between properties and business value. Mom's savings were another $400,000, built carefully over 4 decades of early mornings and flour-dusted aprons. To Diana, sitting in Atlanta, with whatever pressure she was sitting with, that money must have looked like the solution to something she'd never admit out loud. I don't say this to excuse her. There's no excusing it. I say it because the detective was right about the hurry. And I think understanding the hurry is the only way to really understand what happened next. Tom drafted a text for me to send Diana. We went back and forth on the wording for almost an hour. It had to be plausible. It had to sound like a man who'd found out, felt betrayed, and after sitting with it decided the pragmatic thing was to negotiate rather than fight. Diana would believe that because she'd always believed, I was pragmatic to the point of passivity. The mechanic who stayed in the small town. The teacher who never left. The brother who, in her accounting, had simply not been ambitious enough to want more. I sent it on a Wednesday evening. Diana, I know what you've filed. I know about the listings. I'm not going to pretend I'm not hurt, but fighting this out in court would be hard on Mom, and I don't want that. Can we talk? Maybe there's a way to work this out where we both come out reasonably whole. She called within the hour. I was sitting in Tom's conference room. Detective Simmons was across the table. Tom's assistant had set up the recording equipment on my phone 15 minutes before. James. Diana's voice was warmer than it had been the day she called about Mom's supposed fall. Controlled warmth. The kind she used with difficult clients, I imagined. I was hoping you'd reach out. I want you to know this wasn't personal. It felt personal, I said. Mom's situation is more complicated than you realize. I've spoken to her doctor. She paused. She's not as sharp as you think she is. There have been incidents. What incidents? She left a burner on at the Millfield location twice last month. She miscounted a payroll deposit by $3,000. The staff is covering for her, James, because they love her. But she can't run those businesses safely anymore. She'd prepared this. I could hear it. A story she'd assembled carefully, designed to make me doubt what I knew. I kept my voice level. Did you talk to her about any of this directly? It's difficult to have that conversation with her. You know how she gets. I do know how she gets. I talk to her 4 times a week. Silence. Diana. The bank put a hold on the wire transfer. A beat. Just one. I'm aware. There was a miscommunication with the branch manager. It'll be sorted. And the Millfield listing? The market timing is good right now. Once the POA is confirmed, we can move quickly. There it was. Once the POA is confirmed. Not since. Once. The attorney who drew up Mom's existing will. I said carefully, Tom Wallace, he says, he's never seen the POA document before. Says the signature looks different from the ones he has on file. The warmth drained out of her voice. Tom Wallace is a small-town attorney who's been handling simple wills for 30 years. He doesn't know what he's looking at. Maybe. Or maybe the document isn't real, Diana. Silence. A long one. When she spoke again, something in her had shifted. Not broken. Not yet. But shifted. Calculating. James. Think about this carefully. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to preserve what's left of Mom's estate before she erodes it herself. She doesn't have the capacity anymore, legally or practically. What I've done, what I've set up, protects her. By selling her life's work without asking her, by liquidating assets she can no longer manage. Her voice hardened. You have a retired teacher's pension, James. You're fine. The money from the properties could be managed properly, invested, used for her care. That's what this is. And your legal fees for managing it? Another silence. Colder this time. I want to meet, I said. In person. I want to see the POA document. I want to understand what you've actually filed before I agree to anything. She agreed. She drove up from Atlanta that Friday. She arrived at Tom's office at 9 in the morning. Tom wasn't there officially. He was in the back conference room, where Detective Simmons and 2 members of her team were also sitting. The recording equipment was already running. Diana looked the way she always looked, put together in a way that announced effort, not ease. A dark blazer, heels that were slightly too formal for a small-town law office, the kind of accessories that said, I came from somewhere better than this. She sat down across from me and placed a leather folder on the table. The POA, she said, sliding it toward me. Everything is in order. I opened it. looked at the signature page, looked up at her. This isn't Mom's signature. It is. She signed it in my presence. In Atlanta, 6 weeks ago. Mom hasn't been to Atlanta in 3 years. I kept my voice steady. She told me she hasn't left Tennessee since her doctor's appointment in Nashville last spring. Diana's jaw tightened. She's confused about timelines. That's part of the problem. I asked her specifically, Diana. Yesterday, did you travel to Atlanta in the last 6 months? She said no. Showed me her calendar. She keeps a paper calendar, you remember? Every appointment written down in her handwriting. I paused. She has no Atlanta trip. She forgot. She doesn't forget things like that. I set the document down. You forged her signature. I protected her estate. You forged her signature on a legal document to seize control of her assets without her knowledge or consent. I looked at her. That's elder financial abuse, Diana. Under Tennessee law. Under federal law. The leather folder sat between us. Diana looked at it, then at me. Something was moving across her face that I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition, maybe, that the math she'd been running in her head for months had just come apart. You're recording this, she said. Yes. She looked at the folder again. When she looked back up, the composure was still mostly there. But the warmth was completely gone now. What was underneath it was something I recognized from when we were kids, that look she got when she'd lost an argument and knew it, and was deciding whether to concede or double down. She'd always doubled down. I deserve that money, she said quietly. You understand that, right? Not because of the bakeries, because of what I've done, what I've built. I left this town and I made something of myself, and I spent 35 years working at a level you and Mom have never. She stopped herself. Drew a breath. The firm restructured. I was transitioned out. I'm 58 years old, and I was transitioned out of a partnership I built over 20 years. Do you know what that's worth? My severance? She laughed, a short, hollow sound. 4 months. After 20 years. I said nothing. Mom's assets are worth more than that. Significantly more. And she's going to die, James. Not today. But she's 79, and she's going to die, and that money is going to go somewhere. I just thought it should go somewhere useful, somewhere where it could actually matter. She looked at me. You have your pension. You're fine. I needed this. You could have asked. She blinked. You could have called Mom and told her you were in trouble. She would have helped you. You know she would have. She would have sat down at that kitchen table and figured out something. I paused. You didn't have to take it. You didn't have to lie. For just a moment, one moment, something moved across Diana's face that looked like grief. Real grief. The kind that's been compressed under pressure for so long it's become almost unrecognizable. Then it was gone. The door to the back conference room opened. Detective Simmons stepped out. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers, Diana Hartley Brooks. Simmons's voice was quiet, professional. You're under arrest for elder financial abuse, forgery of a legal document, and attempted wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Diana stood. She let them put the handcuffs on without making a sound. But as they guided her toward the door, she turned and looked at me once. You chose her over me, she said. I chose the truth. I said. There's a difference. Mom was fine. Completely, stubbornly, typically fine. When I drove over to her house that afternoon and told her what had happened, she sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug and looked at the window for a long while. Then she asked me if I wanted lunch. Mom, I know, James. I know. She set the mug down. She's still my daughter. I remember teaching her to make pie crust in that bakery kitchen when she was 9 years old. How serious she was about getting the butter cold enough. She wrote out all the steps on a little notepad. She shook her head. I don't know where that girl went, but I know she went a long time ago. We ate lunch. Mom made chicken salad sandwiches, and we sat at the table with the burn mark, and we didn't talk about Diana for a while. We talked about the Millfield location and the new part-time girl Sandra had hired and whether the cinnamon roll recipe needed a small adjustment for the summer heat. After a while, Mom said, "Tom mentioned something to me this morning about a trust. He's been mentioning that for 4 years. I know. I should have listened." She picked up her sandwich. "I want to set it up the right way. All 3 locations, the property, the savings. I want it structured so nobody can ever do this again. Not Diana, not anyone." She looked at me. "Will you help me with that?" "Of course." "Good." She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed, swallowed. "Your coffee is still too weak. By the way, Tom handled the trust documents over the following 3 weeks. Every asset properly structured, properly protected. Every decision requiring multiple authorizations. Sandra, who'd managed the Millfield location for 11 years, was brought in as a co-trustee for operational matters. It was the right call. Mom didn't entirely love sharing control, but she trusted Sandra, and she was wise enough to know that the point of protection is that it has to actually protect you. The forged POA was formally invalidated. The Millfield listing was pulled from the brokerage site. The bank's temporary hold became a permanent security protocol on Mom's accounts, requiring in-person verification for any transfers over a certain threshold. The branch manager sent Mom a handwritten card. Mom put it on the corkboard in the back of the original bakery, next to a photo of the staff from the first year they'd been open. Diana's case moved through the system the way these cases do, slowly, then all at once. Her attorney tried a diminished capacity argument. Not for Diana, for Mom. Tried to argue that Eleanor Hartley had in fact expressed a desire to transfer assets, and that Diana had simply anticipated a request that was coming. The evidence disagreed. Tom's signature comparisons disagreed. Mom's own testimony in a deposition disagreed with remarkable clarity and precision for a woman supposedly in cognitive decline. Mom sat across from Diana's attorney in a conference room and answered every question directly, remembered every date, and at one point corrected the attorney's timeline of events with a level of detail that made the room go quiet. Diana was convicted on all counts. 18 months, with eligibility for early release, plus restitution. I visited her once before she was transferred. The way you visit someone when you're not sure there's anything left to say, but you need to say something anyway. We sat across from each other in a gray room, and she looked different than I'd ever seen her. Smaller somehow, stripped of the blazer and the heels, and the particular armor of someone who's built an identity around being formidable. "How's Mom?" she asked. "Good," I said. She hired a new weekend baker at the Millfield location. The cinnamon rolls sold out in 2 hours last Saturday. Diana looked at the table. "I used to love those cinnamon rolls." "I know." Silence. "I'm sorry, James." She said it the way someone says something they've been practicing, not false exactly, but careful, controlled. I took it for what it was. "I know," I said. I drove back to Clover Hill. The sun was low, the kind of early evening light that turns the hills along Route 9 the color of rust and honey. The kind of light you only really notice if you've spent your whole life looking at the same hills. I've spent my whole life looking at these hills. I've never been sorry about it. Mom was at the original bakery when I got there, because of course she was. It was a Thursday, which meant she was in the back, prepping the Friday morning bread order. The lights were on in the kitchen, warm and yellow through the back window. I could hear her radio through the prop door old country, the kind she'd played since 1984. I went in and sat on the stool by the prep counter, the one I've been sitting on since I was 12 years old. "You're letting the cold air in," she said, not looking up from the dough. "Sorry." She punched the dough once, turned it, punched it again. "How'd it go?" "It went." She glanced at me then. Something passed between us that didn't need words. The particular fluency of people who've been having the same conversation in different forms for 64 years. She nodded once and went back to the dough. I stayed until the bread was in the oven. Then I turned off her radio, which she'd forgotten to do, and locked the back door, which she'd also forgotten to do, and drove home through the rust and honey hills, while the smell of bread baking followed me longer than it should have. Here's what I know now that I maybe only half understood before all of this. People talk about legacy like it's something you build or something you leave. A monument, a document, a number in a will. But my mother's legacy isn't the property value of 3 bakeries on a commercial brokerage site. It's Sandra knowing, without being told, to pull fresh rolls from the oven when Mrs. Dawson comes in on Friday, because Mrs. Dawson lost her husband 2 years ago, and Friday was always their day to treat themselves. It's the Rodriguez family who started coming in 1991, whose grandchildren now sit at the same corner table eating the same glazed donuts. It's the card on the corkboard from a bank branch manager who did the right thing because she knew my mother's name. Diana thought the bakeries were assets. She wasn't wrong, they are. But she was looking at the balance sheet and missing the entire story behind it. That's the thing about staying. People act like it's a failure of ambition. Staying in the place you come from. Building your life in one small pocket of the world and knowing it deeply. But staying is its own kind of work. It's the slow, patient work of understanding that community isn't a backdrop, it's the whole point. And when someone tries to take that from you, from the people who built it and the people who depend on it, you fight for it. Not out of greed, not out of pride, out of love. Mom called me the following Tuesday morning. "Cinnamon roll?" she asked. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I turned off the coffee maker. She was right. It was too weak and drove through town past the high school where I'd taught for 31 years, past the bank on Main Street, past the original Sweet Eleanor's with its hand-painted sign and its lights already on before 7 in the morning. Mom was in the corner booth. She had 2 coffees waiting, and she was already telling a story to the couple in the next booth about the first week she'd opened. Back in 1984, when the oven broke on a Tuesday and she'd borrowed every residential oven in a 3-block radius to finish the morning orders. I'd heard this story more times than I could count. I slid into the booth. She handed me a coffee without looking. I took a sip, still too weak. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the story. The same story I'd been listening to for 40 years. In this same corner booth. In the bakery my mother built from nothing. That's enough for me. That's always been enough.